Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. We've got one news article that we're going to look at today. It's from Politico. No, AP News. I was looking at a political one for something else. And now it gets a little political, but I really think this comes down to you have to be ready and prepared to save yourself and not reliant on your government. Uh, you know, the title of the article is Island Wide Blackout Hits Cuba as it struggles with deepening energy crisis. And, it's a fairly lengthy article. Uh, there's 11 million people that live in Cuba. They've got quotes from individual people saying, food's going bad, surgeries have been postponed. Uh, they said last night they were able to restore power to 5% of Havana's residents. But, they also said, be prepared for it to fail again. Um, you know, they are working on maintaining electricity to communications, which I think is a very important thing to do. Their next thing is emergency services. So they're basically telling their residents, like, your individual neighborhoods where, you need light, uh, refrigerators, AC, that kind of stuff. It's it's further down the priority list. Um, and I didn't look it up, but I'm interested to see. So it's 75 degrees in Cuba right now. It'll get up to 79 this week. The nights are in the upper 60s, lower 70s. Other parts, it's getting into the low 80s. And we're not quite at, summertime temperatures yet. In the summer. Peaks at about 90. Generally 85 to 90. Nights are in the 70s. So, I wouldn't say you're, at major risk of, heat-related injuries. But, if you didn't know this, anything below 70 degrees with prolonged exposure, you get hypothermia. Anything above 90 degrees with excessive exposed times, you can get hyperthermia. So I would also just make the argument just not having power can be a big deal. As preppers, and as I push all the time, you want to stay as close to normal as possible. We have leftovers most every night. I know that because I eat most of those leftovers for lunch the next day. And if I didn't have power to keep that food, safe, we're wasting, probably thousands of dollars a year. So it's really nice. The night before we had rice and sausage, or not rice. Yes, rice. We had those little mini sausages with barbecue sauce, and that was my lunch yesterday after work. And we would throw away half a pound of rice and maybe close to a pound of those sausages because I didn't eat all of them. But, that's getting out of normal. Depending on where you live, not having central air and heating is going to be miserable. I had a family friend that unless it was like May to September that she would run the AC in her house. And she'd run it at like 75. The rest of the year, the AC just never went on. The windows were open, and if it happened to be a warmer-ish day, 78, 79, the inside of the house was a little bit cooler because there's fans and stuff running. But, she was like, people did this for hundreds of years. We'll be perfectly fine. I also know that, just coming in from the heat and, feeling the AC blowing, it feels fantastic. We got a little cold snap, got down to 30 degrees last night, didn't turn the heater on. And when we got up this morning inside the house, it was 53. So not as cold as the outside temperature, but cold enough that wearing shorts and a t-shirt, it was chilly. So layers, start a fire, turn the heater on, and if you don't have access to that, that's getting outside of the norm. And depending on your temperature outside, best worst case scenario is discomfort, and you're basically going to be bundled up, sitting around just trying to stay warm. And worst case scenario is you're going into survival mode and just trying to stay warm enough that you're not going to have hypothermia. And the whole being without lights, there's a lot that you can't do. Before electricity, sun goes down, work mostly stops. You continue to do what you can. Seeing if this is worth talking about news-wise. But, you do what you can through candlelight, and there's not much to do. And so, for some of us, that's when you got your video game or your TV show, or, even the idea of reading a book or playing a board game. You kind of shut down. And in our modern world, we don't just, shut down and stop doing stuff. And, depending on what needs to be done, like, I wash my dishes and do my laundry after the sun's gone down, because my 2-year-old wants to help, and he's not a whole lot of help with those things right now. I work out after he's gone to bed. I do a lot of stuff. And so, being without power is kind of a big deal. So, they talk about this started, at the beginning of the year when Venezuelan oil quit coming into Cuba. The U.S. put an embargo in place, basically saying, set up democratic elections and we'll lift the embargo. Cuba produces 40% of its petroleum. They get a lot of energy from thermoelectric plants, and they are trying to increase their solar capabilities. But they said, for any meaningful amount of, increased, electrical, production, China would have to almost double what they're sending them. Their oil is more of a crude oil. It has a higher sulfur content, so it is also eroding the infrastructure that they have, quicker than cleaner oil. I do like how they also said uh, the government will also grant land for the development of certain projects. Because it is a communist government, so uh, we're going to turn this person's land into state land so that we can try to produce more energy. Which I thought was really interesting because the very first comment on here where it says join the conversation is how's that socialism working out for you? Someone says if only they'd switch to renewable energy sources. Well, if you read the article, they are doing that. The big problem with that, I have one of those little battery banks, and it's got USB chargers. It's got one spot to plug in, like a regular wall outlet thing, and I've got a solar panel for it. The problem is, this unit is about yay big. It weighs 10 pounds or so. It can charge my laptop for 5 hours. It can run my wife's hair straightener for about 5 minutes. It's the battery banks, like the little ones for your phone that you get. It's like 8 times the size of that. I got the largest panel that it would accept, which is a 60-watt panel. That panel is about $100. You pay for part of that money because it folds up and you're supposed to take it, backpacking or whatever with you. And the battery bank itself was about $150. It doesn't have, massive capabilities. You're not running a whole bunch of stuff. I was actually looking at this battery the other day. The Renogy 200 amp hour battery. $400. That is like a good RV size. It's going to cover a lot of your RV kind of stuff. It's not quite the same. Oh, so this one does lithium iron phosphate. Like, this is a complete set. Everything that you're going to need. I think except for wires. 400 watts of solar, 3.6 kilowatt hour battery, 3,000 watt inverter, charge controller. So, a fairly robust system. So this is getting you 3 100 amp hour batteries. And look, you still gotta spend another $20 on the solar panel mounting brackets. So 520 watts of solar input. You can up it to 1,000 if you do a 24-volt system. But $2,500 is, it's a substantial amount of money. And look, they're sitting here saying, you can run an electric screwdriver for half an hour a day, a portable fridge for 24 plus hours, a laptop for 4 hours a day, a circular saw for 45 minutes, 8 light bulbs, 6 hours a day, ceiling fan, 8 hours a day. So, even then, a system like this, you're not washing your clothes, you're not using an electric stove, there's a lot that you're not doing here. I haven't done this for that reason. $2,500 is nothing to laugh about. Although you can get it for $1,800 right now through their spring sale through the end of the month, you're going to save another 13%. You would need to set up, let's say this is covering, 20% of your electrical needs. That's 11 million people. You're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to set something up like this in a country that doesn't really have a lot of this set up in it. And that's kind of where we get, to the meat and potatoes of this argument, or of this video. And that is, you should really be doing a lot of this for yourself. I think the U.S. almost wants us to do this. We have big solar and wind projects that are going in the United States. I've made this argument for years that, if you want cleaner energy, there's an apartment complex that put solar panels over all of the parking area in their apartment complex. There was already a roof there for you to park, it's the tin roof, and, you get these 2 parking spots assigned to you. And they covered that entire thing in solar panels. And, I think they were giving most of it back to the city. And from my understanding, they charged everyone like $150 for it. And then, it covered X percentage of the electrical cost. And so it was an apartment complex where it was like an all bills paid. And so, rent goes up a little bit, but the general, electrical cost goes down. So they kind of met in the middle. And so, if you save on average, $130 a month for electricity, you charged $100, your average cost went down $30. I don't remember much of the details on it, but we have plenty of solar panel real estate already available. We don't need to cut down, giant swaths of land or take over a farm to put in these solar, spots. I'm really surprised a lot more places haven't said, hey, which, I guess there's some legality in that of, we're, eminent domaining, the roofs of all the houses in this neighborhood. And so, yeah, the legality of that is if they eminent domain that stuff, then you can't do it later on and make your electrical bills cheaper because I can kind of see that's too much socialism. I don't like that idea. I changed my mind. Which is why I think our government did so much of a rebate on solar and, pushed you doing that. Because if, 10% of the houses in your area require, 15% less energy costs coming in from, coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear, whatever, then it makes your system as a whole stronger. You're putting extra bracing on your electrical grid by you doing that. Multiply it by 20% of the homes. You're going to have to dump way too much money into it to go completely off grid. It is doable. Plenty of people have done it. But, this 400 watts of solar, so this system is, $2,500. Each of these batteries is, 200 to 250 of that cost. So let's just say 200 of that cost. That's $600 in the batteries. So that knocks this cost down to $1,800. The 3,000 watt inverter, that's another, few $100. Let's just say it's 300. Now you've knocked it down to 1,500. The charge controller and the other thing, let's say a couple of hundred. Your solar panels are now maybe half of this entire cost. So 100 to 250 for each panel. The batteries is what really kills people. Like I looked at putting solar on my house, doing one of the contracts, and just the panels and hooking it up was like 12 grand. The cost of batteries for me to have 100%, energy production was another 20. And that was, I don't want any power coming in at any point. That's also saying, like, we can't go over. Like, we can't decide to turn the AC down to 70 in July. It's got to sit at 73. And then, I needed a couple thousand more for panels to make up for rainy and cloudy days, because we get rain about 48 days out of the year, which is pretty substantial amount. That doesn't include overcast or anything else. We had a big freeze. I had snow on my roof for a week. So I would have needed to go up there and get the snow off, or we would have run out of juice. You put another, several grand into batteries, to go past the, those batteries were 48 hours of just running off batteries. There's probably going to be times where we would need more than 48 hours of battery storage. So, just things to keep in mind is it is very, very possible for you to, piece this system together. It's going to cost about $1,800 to do a system like this, to just run a window unit 24/7 in our bedroom. I haven't bit the bullet on that because $1,800 is a lot of money. And the main purpose of that system is to keep the bedroom, below 70 degrees. We like sleeping in the cold. And we could keep the rest of the house a little bit warmer. It would offset some electrical costs because the AC is the biggest, component. But in an emergency, we don't have to run an AC. We can run the mini fridge. We can charge phones. We can, power lights. Keep the refrigerator on if it was going to be for an extended period, stuff like that. And doing a system like that, you can replicate it for other parts of the house. Gotta look at something real quick. I need to edit some things. It's work related. I've got to split my stuff up. But it's not something that you have to throw the price of a car at. Even having 200-watt panels and a little, pick your brand, Jackery, EcoFlow, Blue Eddy, or you completely make it yourself and put it in a toolbox. Being able to charge your phone. Just because the power's out where you're at doesn't mean the cell tower's out. I keep a lot of videos and movies and stuff downloaded on my computer. As long as that's still functioning, it just needs power. And, that keeps us a lot closer to normal. I've had, this O-Light forever. I specifically like this one because it's the one that takes the AA batteries. And the battery that comes with it, it just has USB-C built into the battery. I could keep this thing charged almost indefinitely with, 10 watts of power. I don't even think they really make 10-watt solar panels anymore. Maybe for individual floodlights. But, being able to power your stuff, you can baby step it. You set up a system that can keep your phone battery charged, your flashlights charged, one of those little 6-can refrigerators. For the longest time, we have one of those 6-can mini fridges. They're at Walmart for 30, 40 bucks. That's what we keep in our scout trailer for scouts that need medication that need to stay cold. And, there's a little 50-watt panel on the roof of our trailer just hooked up to a golf battery that, its only purpose is to charge this little refrigerator to keep medicine cold. If you take medicine, that's probably your cheapest option of keeping it cold. And, you're going to spend less than, $80, $90 to keep your medicine cold. And hey, you're keeping your medicine cold, you can put a water bottle in there. Cold water is infinitely better than room temperature or warm water. A singular soda, a pint of ice cream, whatever. And then you scale it up. Now I want to be able to, run a couple of fans. The scaling on that, the little bitty fan that's this big that you have to put this close so you can feel it. I've slept with that on camping trips, and just having the air flow across your face is what got me to go to sleep. That fan probably uses 20 watts of energy. Yeah, 6-inch or $7 for a 4-inch fan. Oh, and this says that they're USB powered now. Mine used to, I would plug this fan in. I just want to see what your wattage is, and you're not telling me, you're just showing me a bunch of stuff. Maybe it shows it in one of these pictures. They've got it plugged into their laptop. 1 speed. Ignore this fan is suitable for household use only. You can take it outside with you. 2.6 watts. So, every hour you're using 2.6 watts. That means even if this thing was plugged into the solar panel, because the solar panel I have, you can charge, if it's getting light, it'll charge your phone, it'll charge stuff. So, you're still having 57-ish watts, based on your efficiency, going into charging stuff. It's not a bad deal. But figure out what works for you. Figure out what you need to do. I'm not, there's hundreds of other people on YouTube that have talked about solar and all that kind of stuff. Find someone that you can understand and make it, Barney level smart for you. And, get after it. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends and family, leave your comments, do all that kind of stuff. And until then, catch you in the next one.